What's up, YouTube? It's Joe Catchpolia sitting on the couch, making some money, investing in fractional real estate online as usual. I know all of you have heard the phrase "time is money." Um, if you watched my video yesterday, I was talking a lot about a lot of my focus was on the amount of time it takes certain actions to happen, and I had a little bit of a discussion with a few people today that I think aren't don't fully internalize this concept of time really being money at an actual cost for us when things take longer. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about that. And I think part of the reason is if you're not in the real estate industry and you're not in certain industries, like I think consulting really gets this, I think airlines get this. But if you're somebody who's selling a portion, you're breaking up your product over time, and that's how you're selling it, versus say I'm selling widgets, some sort of physical product. You can, there's the way that I'm looking at that value is going to be different, right? So what am I talking about? If if I just have a regular business where I sell any sort of physical product, this is what my inventory looks like, right? If I have this stuff sitting on the shelf, I didn't sell it this week. Okay, maybe I'm losing some holding cost or something, but I could just sell it, and if I sell twice as much next week, I'm just as well off. Well, if I'm in the real estate business, what does my inventory look like? This is it, right? I just have days. I have days available in my property. I don't ever get those days back if I lose them. Um, moving forward in time, it's that I'm accumulating expenses as I hold the property, no matter what I do. But I'm not. There's no way for me to sell last month if last month was vacant, no matter how much demand there is for my property. And I think that this gets lost on a lot of people that are maybe in a business that's not this type of business, right? I think, and I was thinking about it, I've worked in consulting, I've worked in places where we sell, our time, um, and I've worked in real estate. And those have been the only real context I have. And there's not, I've never had something, well, I've had an inventory, I guess, that I've sold online, but it's not, for the most part, I've always just thought about this sort of system, right? Where like, if we don't sell this today, we never have another chance to sell it, versus physical product. If we didn't sell it today, we can sell it tomorrow. And so this is, I think, one of the main reasons why there is, if you have, there's a real bias towards action and speed in the real estate industry. People, um, we don't schedule things for 2 weeks from Tuesday, right? We schedule it for this afternoon. Like, if I need repairs, if I need quotes, I need those today. If we need to make a decision on something, again, we make that decision immediately. We don't send out proposals and counter proposals and then shoot something down and then have to come up with something else, and that comes out a week later. That and the reason is because all that's going on, we might have a product that's sitting vacant, right? And so these we're losing all these days that just disappear. They're being stolen from us by time going on. We just don't get those back. And I think, it's one of the things I think that when I was comparing Lofty and Mogul, the speed at which they address things right now is just so much different, right? Like, if I mention something to Mogul and it's a problem and it's something on their site, they've updated their site to correct errors within 15 or 20 minutes pretty regularly. Like, I mean, now there's been 3 or 4 little times that I've mentioned this. Um, and it's just like right away, like, oh, yep, that's an issue. Let's fix it. And I think that their culture really is leans toward that, and I'm sure it's because of they worked in the Goldman Sachs real estate group or private equity or whatever group it was, had a much similar approach to the use of time as I've always just had to have in my business, because again, time is the only asset we have when we have a property, right? Like, when we're renting out that property, it is just the value over time that we have. And so I think that that's why it's um, really just jarring to me when you have an issue like the universal lending DAO issue, or like, all the Yom stuff that just gets dragged out for months, weeks and months, much longer, and I mean, maybe the Yom one is a little unfair because although I think there's a lot of foot dragging going on, I don't think there's maybe some simple fix because there's, a lot of moving parts in negotiation and whatnot. I think it could be addressed quicker, but I think it's not the best example, right? The ULD, I think, is a perfect example. The Universal Lending DAO problem was identified 7 months ago. Um, there's definitely simple solutions to that problem, but they haven't, there's been discussions online about how that's going to be handled, but it hasn't been done, right? And it's, as time goes on, you know, that 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 is costing people money because maybe they would have been able to sell that, if it was fixed right away, maybe they liquidate that position, put it in something else. Maybe they're just getting their yield over time. Maybe they're going to get made whole, but I doubt it. But so that the existence of this time is money mindset just doesn't really seem to be there on Lofty as much as it is, on Mogul or some of the platforms that I like a little bit more. But I just wanted to dig into a little bit like, okay, really, what does that mean on a specific property? So I'm just looking at the Raymond Ave property, just some of their numbers. Because one of the things that I threw out there was like, yeah, every week that we delay something is like almost 2% vacancy rate. And I wanted to just get into the math of that a little bit, but also just in general, what we're looking at. So with our properties, there's some, expenses that are not fixed expenses. They're variable with whether or not there's a tenant in there or not. And so I want to just ignore those, right? Like, let's just think about your property taxes, your insurance, and your interest. This is for that property. It's a relatively cheap property. But this is, and so all I did is like look at like, okay, my total fixed expenses on that property are $3,255. So every single day I'm accumulating almost $9 in expenses. And if during that time I don't have the place rented, I don't have anything to offset that, right? So I'm accumulating this like actual negative balance every single day, right? There's money owed that we're not covering. If you look at that on a weekly basis, it's $62, almost $63. Um, that happens no matter what, right? I mean, we're ignoring the expenses that happen. uh, you know, you also might have lawn maintenance that you're paying for when it's vacant, that when the tenant is in there, they pay for. Same thing with utilities. You're paying for those when it's vacant. If you have a tenant in there, that they're paying their own utilities. I mean, so it actually ends up being even more expensive than this, but these are the ones that it's really easy to just pull from their website and do some math on, right? And then if we think about it from a revenue perspective, that property is, $1,095 a month. That means every day that we take an extra day to get it rented, it's costing us $36. We're losing $36 in revenue. And every week, we're losing almost $253. And this is here, this math here, dividing that 253 by the annual rent is where I get that 2% vacancy. Really, it's 1.92%, right? If there were 50 weeks in a year, it would be a perfect 2%. But this is where that's coming from. I mean, it's not like I'm just making up that number. So I want to show that math because some people question that, like, well, what do you mean a week is 2% vacancy? And so if you miss a week, if there's a couple different times where we added a week to a process, it might change the vacancy rate and if from 2% to 4%, and if you look at uh, pro formas and just add, you go from saying, okay, I'm assuming a 5% vacancy rate to now I'm assuming 6.92 because I know it's going to take me an extra week to get this done because of the way governance votes work versus if I owned it in real life and so if I'm having to add this cushion to all of my vacancy rates, all of a sudden your pro formas for these properties are just going to be absolutely horrible. And this is just assuming it just takes 1 week. Well, 1 week means we did one vote, right? Like, I mean, there's uh, that's not even considering, okay, what happens if during that time somebody disagreed, they put out a counter proposal, people were like, oh, that makes sense. Now let's do a new vote after this happened. Now, sometimes we can get our votes out in a couple of days, and maybe we have a chance to iterate that a little bit. But regardless of how you look at it, I don't know why I dragged that down there. That was an accident. Regardless of how you look at it, every week that goes by with us, taking the time, like we were talking about last night, taking the time to coordinate things, to negotiate things, if it's different from the model of if I owned that property outright and I could just make the decision right away, or if we had some individual that was making the decision, every week that we lose, it's 2%, right? And again, this is just lost revenue. Um, it's not even taking into account that the additional expenses that we are carrying when it's vacant that you wouldn't be otherwise. Um, it does take into account these, right? Because those fixed expenses, I'm not trying to double count those and saying like, oh well, those plus these, right? I'm just looking at but there are some that get basically are doubled because it goes from us paying it to the tenant paying it, if it is, if we have it full, or at least additive to the lost revenue. But so like if you look at like that property, the total capitalization right now is about $48,000. So every day, yeah, this doesn't seem like a whole lot, right? You're just losing um, 0.08% of your value. So yeah, all right, a day goes by, I lost a little bit of value, but every week that we end up, not having a tenant that we otherwise would have if we were a little bit more organized, if we were able to actually make decisions easy, it cost us 0.5%. We're losing 0.5% of the asset value, right? Which is absurd if you think about, or of the, of the at least the market value. If you think about what that asset should really be valued at. I mean, it should be about double that if you look at like the real world asset value. Which reminds me, please like and subscribe. In the description to this video, I have links to all the places where I'm currently invested in fractional real estate online. Do your own due diligence on all of those platforms and any of the properties that you see. Just because I say I think the asset value on this should be double what that is, doesn't mean I'm right. Doesn't mean that you should go out and spend twice as much on this property, right? You want to do your own due diligence always. Don't ever just take my word for it, or really, you shouldn't take anybody else's word for it either. Also, in the description of this video, you'll find the link to the Discord that I have set up where we talk about stuff like this and a whole bunch of other random stuff related to fractional real estate. We have a whole bunch of people that have joined recently, quite a few lurkers that are just in there, not really, jumping in part of the conversation. But quite a few that are too. Right? It's been great to be part of that. The last couple of weeks, I feel like it's really picked up. We've had people talking about all different platforms and different properties, and it's exactly what I'm hoping for. I think that there's over time, one, I think that we'll see some migration from worse platforms to better platforms. I think that that's just going to happen. But what I really am hoping for is that as a group, we're able to sort of put pressure on some of the worst platforms to get themselves together to do things right, to maybe be right by their clients, and do things in a way that we can actually invest on their platforms and have it be profitable. Um, whether that's Lofty, who I talk about all the time, only because I still have a decent amount of money on there, and there are ways to make money, but it's always based on someone else has already lost money. But it also too, the sites like Arrived Homes and all the Arrived clone sites, like if those, if they could produce better deals, I'd be on, I've sort of just dismissed them, right? Because it's tough to say the same thing every day that they just have bad deals, right? Like that their deals that they're, and when I say bad, they're just saying what the percent returns that they're just telling you you're going to make on there are just not attractive to me. That's what I mean by bad. Not that there's something inherently wrong with the properties, but that they're just not there. So until their secondary market opens up and hopefully we can jump in and get some better deals there, I don't think there's a whole lot else for me to say about it. Although I might end up explaining that or exploring that site a little more and sharing. But in general, like we just shouldn't accept this, right? Like if you're investing in a platform that is the way that the business works on there is really destroying value, like because that property, if it were run by an individual, would be occupied today, and because it's being run by committee and we're herding cats and it's taking us weeks longer to do everything than it should. you were actually losing value. This just happened to be the one I did the math on. Every week that goes by, we're losing 0.5% of our total value of our investment. I mean, you can't do that for very long before we're just in a really deep hole that we can't dig our way out of. I mean, if you look at some of the properties on the platform, some of them have been sort of in this weird limbo for a really long time. There was an announcement today about the one I mentioned yesterday that had voted to do a capital call, and then Lofty never implemented it. And so the announcement that came out today was, well, we can't actually do it because that specific DAO doesn't have, the technology, there's a technology problem. There weren't enough tokens originally created when that DAO was created to have this, to have the additional dilutive capital call. But what, and he did apologize, so I was glad to see that because I think we rarely get an actual apology on there. But I think that it was it was almost 3 full weeks from the time that that vote result went out. I want to say the result went out on the first or second somewhere. It came out quite a while ago. And so, one, I think the vote should never have been allowed to go out if it wasn't something that Lofty wasn't going to be able to accommodate. And again, I think to his credit, he mentioned that in the announcement that they try to make sure that didn't happen in the future. But it's not like it's an isolated incident, right? But so that's 3 additional weeks plus the time it took for the vote. So I don't know if it was another week, that that they haven't been able to raise capital and move that property forward. So that's okay, 4 weeks' time, we've lost 2% of value. If the math is similar to this particular property, we've lost 2% of the total value of that property or the market cap. And maybe not, maybe it's different. But even if it's one, if you can't be losing a percent here and there from something as simple as raising capital to do, when there are people sitting there ready to put their capital in to make something happen. Um, seeing that and seeing that, I went back and looked at the time of when the vote happened and how long they just sort of sat and waited to give an answer to it. And then the answer was one that like, and that should have been just caught on the front end, right? Like, oh, and honestly, there should be something on every property page of the ones that just say, hey, you can't do a dilutive capital call on this. We know you can do it on 90% of the properties on the platform, but this one special, you can't do it. I'd love to see that indicated somewhere because it's not clear, he mentioned in the announcement which ones you could or couldn't, but it's not clear. I think that one was a really good recent example of time just like the platform just not acknowledging that time is money for us, right? That we are uh, every time we get this delay in an answer to something, it's costing us actual money. Like we're okay, that fix didn't happen. It's 3 weeks went by. It's 3 weeks of lost rent, and you're like, yeah, we couldn't have rented it 3 weeks ago, but we would be 3 weeks closer to having a tenant in that space, right? And so 3 weeks of our inventory just disappeared from what could have been caught up front. Uh, it's tough, right? It's tough to want to keep investing in a system that can just basically destroy your capital in that manner, right? Just 3 weeks of inventory just taken away on on something that should be preventable, right? And hopefully they do prevent that going forward. But then what's the next one? What's the next issue that we're going to wait, weeks or months to get an answer on? I don't know. And so, I really just wanted to put some math around this because I know I ranted quite a bit yesterday about like how this is really impacting us. And I do think from having some of the discussions I had today, a lot of people just although everybody's heard time is money, I think it's not so, it doesn't feel as real to most people as it feels to people that have really been in the real estate industry a long time because we know, that interest rate clock keeps moving and then, our calendar just keeps disappearing, right? Like our just the every time you cross off a day, that's a day of or one day of inventory that's gone. And the more I think that you can internalize that, I think it really helps to think about the way that our business model works as far as like properties that I want to invest in. Um, it's one of the reasons I've talked about this. This is the last little aside, and then I think that we'll wrap it up. But so it's one of the reasons why, if I'm looking at short-term rentals, I really would much rather have ones that have relatively consistent uh, rentals throughout the year versus ones that have a really strong season in a short time of the year. Because, for example, if you're in a beach town that is like, you're in Maine and you have like two, maybe three good months of rentals each year. If you're on coastal Maine, I just happen to grow up there, so that's the example that jumped into my mind. If you have something wrong with the property and you lose 2 weeks in the middle of your summer, those 2 weeks might actually be, you know, 5 or 6 or 7% of your, well, it's even going to be more than that. I mean, it could end up being like 10 or 15% of your annual revenue just by giving up a couple weeks in the summer. Versus if you're in San Antonio, Texas, we do have some cyclicality, but it's not nearly as strong. So no matter what 2 weeks I give up, I'm not going to have this huge impact on my income. Um, but there's a million different examples in real estate where this comes into play. It does when we're selling, right? Like the if we're as we're getting closer to a sale on a property, over time we're still spending, we're paying property taxes on that property, even though, so like your prorations go up. So we had a sale that one of my team members was working on a couple weeks ago that got delayed almost 2 weeks. And the buyer or the seller was like, "Hey, how come I'm getting X dollars less money?" And it's because your holding costs, your portion of the property taxes, um, gets prorated differently, and that actually costs you money. So there are all these instances where time, in fact, equals money. And so, if I'm going to invest with people, I want everyone to be on the same page and understand that any sort of um, hesitancy or, delay for no real reason, like if we have some very solid business case, but we're busy dealing with other things, is just not a great reason, right? And so, I mean, even, it's, I realize a lot of our property managers right now on the platform are just really, overtaxed as far as their time goes. But unfortunately, that's costing a lot of the DAO's money. And at the moment, I don't necessarily think there's a real solution to that, because there's not like some other people stepping up to take them over or put more time in. Um, I can't even believe almost forgot about this. But the other thing, once we really believe that time is money, then we have to stop and think about, do all of when we were talking about like the decentralization, if there are 300 of us that own a single family home and we're all taking time to think about that home, how much money are we wasting by having so many people involved in these like sort of little investments? That was something that, really hit me after I finished that video yesterday, and I was digging into one of the properties, and it was Odom, and it has, 769 wallets attached to it. And somebody pointed out, yeah, it might not be that many people because some people use multiple wallets and stuff, but even if it's 350 people invested in that, if all of those people are taking their time to think through what's going on with it enough to make votes about it, it's an awful lot of time that is being wasted in the management of a property that probably could be better managed by, just a few people, which was my point yesterday. So I'm not going to get into that again, but it did make me just realize like how much time we have that's really collectively getting burned digging into these things. And so I don't know. That's really, and this is sort of an extension of like last night's discussion. If you didn't check out that video, maybe a lot of this seems, sort of out of left field, but hopefully not. Um, One, I'm curious, put it in the comments or jump in the Discord and tell me about it. Are there other examples that you can think of of where this time is money thing is really costing us in fractional real estate? Um, I mean, I know I can think of quite a few, but what's the one that bothers you the most? Or what's the one that you think is the most preventable or fixable and we're just dealing with right now that maybe as a group we should approach some platforms and say, hey, why don't you fix this? Because this is costing us money. I have some ideas on that, but I'd like to hear from the rest of you. So go ahead, put that stuff in the comments.